Good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you're located. Thank you again for joining us for our Open Office Hours series on fixed assets management. This is our 13th session. Thank you again for your support through all this process. Today, we're going to talk about fixed assets management. My name is Alejandro Alvarez, and I'm a senior solution consultant with Crowe, and I'll be guiding you through this presentation. We have received some questions through the registration process, only 3 or 4 questions. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go through the presentation, and we'll using the Q&A session, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. So first, just a brief high-level overview on fixed assets management. As we've mentioned before, NetSuite comes with best practices loaded into the application. Fixed assets management is one of those modules that's optional. It's something that you can add to the suite, but once you add it to the suite, it's fully integrated with the rest of the suite. And the process or the benefit of fixed assets is obviously automate the management of those fixed assets from an accounting perspective. You can also automate and manage other things in the fixed assets management record, and we'll walk you through that using the platform, using workflows and scripts. You can add additional information that will help you manage beyond the accounting process. Here you can see that the flow that NetSuite recommends for fixed assets is that you start with the purchasing transaction. Fixed assets can be generated from purchase orders or invoices, as well as inventory transfers, or you can upload them manually or via CSV to the system. The benefit of using the native transactions in NetSuite is that it updates both the GL, the GL account, and also creates a subledger record. Fixed assets is one of those rare occasions where you do have a separate table with the detail of the assets that it gets reconciled to the general ledger, and we'll see a couple of reports of that throughout the way today. But the process is that you start with a vendor bill as the accounting impact transaction that has a fixed asset. Then you can go through a process of asset proposal where NetSuite will tell you those transactions that have been impacting the fixed assets account, and then you generate that will generate the actual asset listing once you accept the proposal. And from there, you go through a periodic depreciation, or eventually a revaluation of the asset, a transfer of the asset between departments, locations, or even subsidiaries of the company, and an asset disposal or write-off. So this is the main flow of the application, and this is what we'll go through. Now I'll switch over to the application, and you're all familiar with NetSuite. So when some of you have fixed assets already, the majority of you don't have fixed assets and are using spreadsheets per the registration. So I will go through sort of a more administrative piece of these assets and the setup of that, so you can see all the information that the system carries, and then we'll go through some of the transactions that eventually feed on fixed assets. So I'm logged in as an administrator. Obviously, you can do this from any role that has permissions to the fixed assets module. And when you have the fixed assets module, it has its own section in the menu. In any role, you'll see it here under fixed assets. And you'll see, depending on your access, you'll see access to all these activities. First, I'll go through the setup, just very high level. A couple of things that we do want to highlight that NetSuite allows you to do that are controlled by the setup of the asset is a couple of things that are important is whether you want to allow future data depreciation. So if you have future periods open and you want to run transactions for future periods to get them in your books, then you have to check this in order to be able to do it, but you natively is restricted to not do it. That's the standard configuration. Whether you want to be able to value the asset in line, so not through a transaction, but actually just update the current cost of the asset manually, and maybe because you made an error of the upload and you want to do it that way before you start depreciating it. and then you have, and whether you allow for negative asset costs. So sometimes you have, you'll have a vendor bill that creates an asset, and then you have a vendor credit that gives you a credit for that asset, and you want to be able to negatively depreciate that. You're going to have an asset that has a negative value that brings it back to zero, basically. So this is what that would allow you to do. And then there's a setting here where you can import assets midlife. So for those of you that are not using NetSuite and you want to use NetSuite, obviously there is a process to bring your midlife assets into NetSuite with the depreciation that it has accumulated, all the expense so far, and any other information. So we want to there's a process to do so that we help you with through the implementation. If you decide to give it a shot and do it yourselves, then obviously you can always, as always, you can always be in the fixed asset piece, and you can go to Suite Answers to be able to get information on fixed assets just by going to Suite Answers. Fixed assets, you don't have the benefit of other modules where you have where you click on help and it takes you straight to fixed asset information, because fixed asset is a bundle that gets added to the account. It's not available here, but everything's available in the fixed assets section, including user manuals as well. Sorry, under support. Even if you go to help, if you're looking for more information or recent fixed asset manuals, you can come here to user guides on the help menu, and you'll be able to find all the manuals that NetSuite has will be here, including fixed assets. So there's hundreds of user manuals here, updated to the newest release when there has been changes. Additionally, the other thing that I want to highlight now that for those of you that are on NetSuite is that the new release is out. So just a commercial here that you should all have this portlet showing your account, and you'll be able to see here the release notes. And if you click on the release notes, it will show you new functionality on fixed assets as well. We haven't gone through, this is fairly new, we haven't gone through that yet, but we will be going through that and sending out some tips and cool things in the next few weeks. But this is something that you definitely want to take a look at, and you can look at previous ones as well in the help section. So once you've gone through this kind of first setup that of the application, then you go through the actual accounting setup, and I'll just highlight a couple of things so we understand how fixed assets work. I'm going to open a few tabs here. If you have intercompany, if you have multiple entities and you are going to use a transfer of assets between entities, then you're going to have to set up transfer accounts, do from accounts, because NetSuite will do the transaction behind the scenes, but obviously there's going to be do from accounts. It's like selling assets between entities and doing it at arm's length. So you want to be able to set that up. It's pretty straightforward. You also have a list of asset types, and this is very important that you determine your list of asset types, because if you have different asset accounts, if you break down your asset accounts in different accounts for assets and for asset accumulated depreciation, not necessarily for the expense, but you can also do that, you're going to want to describe this here, because this is what's going to drive the asset proposal record. And what I mean by that is that if you go to the accounts section or your chart of accounts, you can have multiple fixed asset accounts that are rolled up to a parent fixed asset account, and then the corresponding accumulated fixed asset accounts. You don't have to have it in this setup, but this is recommended if you want to then be able to run depreciation for certain assets and not other assets, and we'll see that in a second. But when you define your asset types, then I'll just open one that we're going to use today: furniture and fixtures. And fixtures. This is where you define all the accounting related to that fixed asset type, and starting with the method. that you're going to use to depreciate it, the residual value, the lifetime of that asset type, and you can have multiple, you can change this on the account, on the asset when you create it if you want to, but this is what's going to default. You can also define your, other things like when you create an asset, do you want it to be automatically set up for depreciation, or do you want to manually review it before it automatically starts depreciating at the end of that month? Any revision rules when you revise the value of the asset, where everything, whether the impact is on the current period or the remaining periods, remaining life, you determine all that. All these values again can be changed in the asset itself when the asset is created. You can define the account. So what's the asset account? What's the depreciation account? The depreciation expense or charge account, and any other accounts for write-off, write-down, disposal, and then you can see when it was last checked. So there's an audit of this. So you'll be able to define different accounts, so your accounting matches what you want it to be. You can have all that detail in the GL. And you can also define other things like, this type of asset require inspection. What's the inspection period? And this is all informational. This is not an asset management in the sense of, a CMMS or corrective maintenance management system, but we can certainly use it to alert you of things if you use workflows or custom fields. So this is the setup of the fixed asset type. And all of them are the same. You can define as many as you need. And then the other thing that I wanted to show is that NetSuite comes with 29 depreciation methods. You can take your pick here, but you can also create your own depreciation method. So if you know how you want to depreciate it, there are formulas that you can create, and there's help in the system for this, where you can define the formula and the name and the description, so that you can create your own asset depreciation type. And every time that new GAAP or IFRS methods come out, NetSuite updates the list, but you can create your own if you're creative. Finally, then you have, you can define alternate methods of depreciation as well. So depreciation types and depreciation methods by subsidiary. So with that said, what we're going to do is, we're going to go through the entire cycle of creating a transaction that affects a fixed asset, and through the process of proposal of the fixed asset, and then we'll go through the different transaction types that the system has. So like we mentioned before, you can start from a purchase order, or you can, that eventually creates a vendor bill. So I'm going to just, in this case, enter a vendor bill directly. The purchase order process would be like you have it if you use purchase orders. If not, you can just use a vendor bill. And the vendor bill is going to be your standard vendor bill functionality. So I'm just going to create a vendor bill today, and I'm going to select my subsidiary. So I'm just going to create ACOM Business Solutions for the US, and then I'm going to, I'm going to make it approved already. So now go through the approval process. That's another one. I'm going to give it a reference number, asset 001. And then you can define your vendor bill as always using either items. So items, if you use items, you have items like chairs or computers, then the items need to be mapped to, there would be non-inventory items, not so, and not inventory. So I'm not going to create it like this, but if I create a Dell laptop, then where you use Dell laptop, if you go to the item, you're going to have to make sure that when you're defining this non-inventory item, you have the where you have the expense account, where you're going to do here in the accounting section, where you have expense account, instead of using expense account, you're going to use a fixed asset account. You're going to define, machinery and equipment or computers or equipment. That example, but that's where you would do it. If it's a non-inventory item for purchase, it wouldn't have an income account. So this is where you would define if you want to use items. A lot of you may use expenses directly. So I'm going to use the expense here, and I'm going to code it directly to furniture and fixtures here. So, and I'm going to say that I bought, $1,500 worth of furniture. And see that there's nothing else that's required, and that will alert me anyway, and I'm going to save this bill. As you can see, once I save this bill, if I go to the GL impact of this bill, once it saves, apologize, its system's a little bit slow today. We'll get there. Once it saves, the bill is open. You pay your bill when you need to, but if you look at the GL impact, it's going to debit that fixed asset account and credit my AP account as expected. So once I've created the bill at the beginning of the month, anytime during the month, don't mind the dates that I'm using, but it's going to be today. Then you would come to transactions, and you see all these transaction processes in NetSuite that you can have. So I'm going to start with the proposal. So I'm going to leave that bill open, and I'm going to go to my proposal. And here's where you can tell the system, where the system will propose the assets that you can create instead of you creating them manually. So you can filter this by asset type. I'm going to show all asset types. You can filter this by subsidiary if you want. You need to select the subsidiary. I'm just going to do the US. And you click on propose new assets. The fixed asset management bundle, for those of you that are not familiar, runs a process in the background for that. So it will give you this process. You can see the process running if you want to, or you can go and you can continue doing other things using other tabs in NetSuite, and you can even close this. But if you want to see that it's finished and there's no issues, no errors, it'll tell you if there's errors here. You can leave this open and just allow it to refresh, and it'll take it can take a few seconds to a few minutes depending on the number of assets. This one completed with error, so I want to show you what the error would be. And it says missing the asset account for the asset type. So what I'll do is that I'll go and set up my look at my asset types. And look at furniture and fixes, and make sure that the asset type, the account that I have here, is the right account. So it is the right account. So let's check why it's giving me that error. But we'll look at the bill again, make sure that there's no issue there. So let's try that again. I'm going to select my asset type. Well, here it is. Funny thing is that it gave the error, but it still proposed the asset. So here you can see the asset. It has the asset here from bill asset 0001 that I created. Furniture and fixtures is the asset type account. It knows because it's furniture and it has a straight line. It's a quantity of 1. When you use expenses, it's always going to assume a quantity of 1. If you're using items, then you can create, you buy 5 computers, you will create a fixed asset with a quantity of 5 that you can eventually split up if you sell any of those computers. So you can see all the information here in the subsidiary. So once I have this, I can go to the next step, which is to generate the asset. It still asks me the subsidiary because it's mandatory. So I'm going to select the US subsidiary, and I'm going to click on generate asset. You can the proposal if you don't want to create the asset, or if you created the asset manually, if that's your process. but you eventually want to generate assets in the system, we recommend that you would check those assets and reject the proposal. And what that will do is that then those assets will not be proposed in the future. Some companies have created, or you came from, you sometimes you want to create the assets manually. That's your process. You have somebody uploading that. You may change after this that process, but maybe you create the asset before you receive the vendor bill. So all those things can be managed by just rejecting that proposal. So now it's running the generation process. And again, it's going to create that process, and that process is a little bit more involved because it's creating, all the depreciation activities. And what I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm going to show you the assets list. So obviously you have a list of assets that you can access, and this is just a safe search. Those of you familiar with safe searches, it's a safe search. You can modify this and have as many versions as you want. You can have, a fixed asset with inspections that are due in the next X number of days, right? So you can define all your searches that you want, and from this you can create alerts, dashboard reports, everything that we've done in previous sessions about reporting and dashboarding. Same concept here. So this is the list. As you can see here, it was auto-generated, the asset, for $1,500. If you have them as descending order of asset number, you'll always see the ones that are generated here, and you can see that NetSuite auto-generates the asset number, and then gives it an asset name that you would want to then update. So this is the asset record that was created. I'm going to edit this quickly and just give it another name. I'm going to say, office hours furniture. You can, if you want to track an asset number or an asset tag where you have that, you can track that as well. If you bought it from a project, related to a project, you can link it to a project, so you can then the depreciation will be tracked against that project. If that's, if you want to do that, you would link it here, and then you can see the information of the assets. You have your original cost and the current costs are going to be the same right now. The residual value, you can, the percentage, and calculates the value. Like I said before, you can change the method of depreciation if you wanted to for this specific asset. You can change the lifetime. You can change the period. Do you want to depreciate this annually and not monthly, for example? And then under the general tab, it brought in information from the transaction that you cannot change at this point unless you do a transfer. So I didn't select the department, class, or location, but there is a subsidiary. There is a custodian that is linked to this asset type that, again, I can't change. It tracks when I purchased it. Yeah, it tracks when I want to depreciate it. So I'm going to start depreciating it this month. I could change this to next month. I'm going to leave it here for a depreciation example. You could say next month and change it here. It auto-calculates the end date based on the lifetime. And this is where you define, for example, if it's going to be depreciated or not. Maybe I don't want to depreciate it now. Maybe I bought this asset and I linked it to a project, so I don't want to depreciate it until this project is complete. So it links projects, the project module, and the fixed asset management module that way. So you can have the asset here, but you're not depreciating it yet. So I'm going to leave it to true. So you can change all those things. If you had a purchase order, it would be here, who you bought it from. It links the bill, so you know what bill, what line in the bill, and then all the other information here. So I'm going to save this now that I've changed the name. And it warns you that any changes that you make may affect depreciation. And now, just highlight over other tabs that we have here. Obviously, it brings all the accounts that you have for this fixed asset. If for whatever reason you want to change them, you could. There is some basic lease information in the system. We've developed a lease optimizer application for NetSuite that runs in NetSuite. It's developed within the system. Crowe has developed that. has a lot more functionality than the lease asset. It's a separate record, so we're not repurposing fixed assets. We're actually creating a lease record and integrated with journal entries and with other transactions. So if you're interested in that, just shoot us a note. That's a very interesting product. You can track insurance information if you want to, informational, so you can see assets by insurance company, etc. You can track maintenance, like I mentioned, who's your maintenance company, if you have a contract or not, do you require inspection? So all these are informational fields that you can use, like I said, in reports. If we won't get into this too much today, but you can build compound assets. And compound assets is just basically you create an asset that is made up of other assets. So if you want to track, a computer, a desktop with a monitor in the same asset because they always go together, then you could create a compound asset that would depreciate each child asset separately, but you can track reports of the total value of that compound asset. So this is where compound components show up. You can track multiple methods. We're going to concentrate on accounting depreciation, but you can define, you can have the same asset depreciate for accounting and for tax purposes, and then run reports for tax purposes, separate from the accounting depreciation, all within the system, and it runs all at the same time when you're doing your depreciation. And then other things like, asset usage, there is an asset usage depreciation method. So if you want to depreciate based on hours used for a machine instead of months, because maybe it's sitting idle there without being used, you can do that as well. So, and then you have to enter the usage via an upload or manually to track that. So all this, and then you'll have the depreciation history here, which is, as accountants, what we care about. And NetSuite projects the depreciation. So if I open the depreciation here, you'll see that this asset, tracks every transaction. So it tracked the acquisition here, and then there's going to be all the depreciation that it's projecting, and it uses this for reporting purposes. So if you want to budget what your depreciation expense is going to be for the next 12 months, you can run that out of NetSuite by asset type or for asset types, that when you can budget based on your actual depreciation and then project any other depreciation that you may have for new assets that you may purchase as well, right? So it tracks the book value for the asset for the life of the asset. So all that information is in the system. Once you've bought the asset, and then the next process, and you created the asset, the next process is the depreciation of that asset. And so the depreciation process, and you'll see that every process here looks similar. It's going to be based on, you define what you want to depreciate and when. So you can depreciate multiple asset types or just one. I'm just going to depreciate this one for purposes of the example and speed. You can define what subsidiary. So I'm just going to do US, which is this asset. And then you define the depreciation period. So I'm depreciating end of month, and you can put a depreciation. July depreciation, a note, furniture and fixture. And then you click on depreciate assets. And again, it's going to run a background process that is going to depreciate the assets, and all the assets that fit into this category, right? Here's the process. While this runs, I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to run these transactions, but I'm going to show you the other transaction types that you can have. Let's start with disposal. So disposal, you're going to have two types of disposals in the system. You can either sell the item, the asset, or write it off. So if you're going to sell it, then you're going to define a date. So I'm going to sell it tomorrow. You define a customer, and you define a sale item. So you would have created a service item for sale or an non-inventory item for sale that you can use in your invoice to track the revenue of that sale, right? And so the standard accounting, and then you'll select the asset that you want to sell here. So select the asset that I want to sell, and then once you've selected all this information, then you click dispose, and it's going to, and you select the price, right? I'm selling this at, this is the current value of the asset, so I'm selling this at $4,500, and it's going to create an invoice that is going to, and it's going to create a journal to to write off the value of the asset to the account that you used in the asset type, and then from that you get your gain or loss for that asset as well, right? So everything balances. So it auto creates invoices for you. There's a setting in the setup where you define what invoice format you want to use. So you can create an invoice form that's just for fixed assets. That's very, very simple, right? So all that is in the system. And the other option that you have is that you can, just write it off, right? So if I do a write-off, then I don't have to select a customer, sale, or sell item. I do have to select what item I'm writing off. So I will run this process here, and I'm gonna write off this asset. Obviously, if you're writing it off, it's gonna be to 0. So I'm gonna, write off the asset here and have it run in the process. While we go back to the process status and we see the asset finish depreciating. It should have at this point. So it's still updating the records. There's many assets here with that fixed asset type. And while that runs, one of the questions that we received was, and I think, I'm not sure if the person is in the call, but the question was, has NetSuite addressed the ability to handle depreciation of assets in numbers over 500,000 effectively? So NetSuite has no written limitation on the number of fixed assets. 500,000 fixed assets is a big number, so that may have some issues on the speed of the process and the performance. But there are ways that NetSuite handles that. If you have 500,000 assets, then you'll probably have a lot of transactions. So at this point, NetSuite offers additional processing capabilities to be able to optimize and prioritize the fixed asset scripting so that you don't run into timeouts. So there are solutions for that. If you're interested, we could obviously run by NetSuite, but like I said, there's no known limitation for that. Let's see if this finished. Okay, so the depreciation completed. So I'm going to go back to my fixed asset here that I created, and if I refresh it, we'll see now that my current book value is $14.75 because I depreciated this month. My original cost and my current cost don't change. My book value will change. So this is basically the original cost, and you have the option of changing the current cost if you do a revaluation of the asset, but the original cost will never change in the system. If you need to change it for purposes of reconciling back to the transaction because you made a mistake when you entered it, the best practice would be to revalue it at the date, right, on the month where you enter that GL impacting transaction. We've got to do the depreciation history, and we open that again. We can see here now that there's a journal entry created already, and this journal entry, I'm gonna click here and leave, and the journal entry is created. You can define whether it gets created with an approval process or not. This is approved for posting, and this journal entry is for all the assets that I have here for that specific asset type. You can also define if you want one transaction per asset, one journal entry per asset, one journal entry per asset type, how you define that parameter in the configuration. So here you can see depreciation of this asset and the memo that I put when I created that depreciation process. And now, so now my asset is updated, and all the depreciation is running in the system. It's updated for that. I can do that for other assets. Let's see how the disposal is working. So the disposal process completed. So if I go back to my list of assets here, I'm going to have an asset that which I tracked, which was the asset that I used for this. I didn't do that. But here's where you'll see that the asset completed. If I go to my journal entries, just to see my latest journal entry, we'll see there that the journal entry that was created for that disposal, for that write-off. Is going to be this one for the write-off. And the transaction there, it debited my expense of my expense for that asset. It credited the fixed asset and credited the accumulated depreciation. So I wrote it off, right? So those are the standard transactions that it would do. And if they had to do any depreciation to catch up, it would have done the depreciation in a different journal entry. So moving forward, this, revaluation, I'm just going to show you the process, how it works. So you can define an asset that, that you want to revalue. So if I want to take this one that we created right now, and I want to revalue it, what's going to happen is you select the asset, it brings all the information, and you can calculate it. So maybe I want to, I want to write it down 5%. And I want to do it, today or tomorrow. And if I calculate it, it's going to down here calculate what the write-down is going to be. It's going to be 5% of the value, and then I can adjust any of these values here if I want to. And then if I process the revaluation, then it's going to take that asset and again run a process in the background here, where it's going to revalue the asset. And if we go back to my asset here, it eventually will have a different current cost here. It will be, you're basically changing, revaluing this current cost. So see how quickly this runs. So while that runs, and we'll come back to that, just show you some of the reports and searches. So you have, I'm not going to go through each of these reports. They're all documented in the fixed assets manual, but you have a report on additions, you have a report on disposals, you have, obviously an asset list, you have an asset register, you have a list of all the proposals that you've run and whether you've created an asset or not. So if you are, you want to see what asset was created when you run an asset of a proposal of 10 assets, which is which, you can use this proposal history to match it to the asset. And then you have other things like inspections due, inspections renewals, etc. And then you have reports, and the reports run a little bit different than your other standard reports, where the reports you come to this window and you select your report type. So if I want to see, for example, an asset register, I can say, what's my asset register from the beginning of the year until now, until the end of July. You can define, which assets. So I don't want my leased assets if you're using the leasing functionality in NetSuite. And you can define, what asset. Then you have sort of filtering information. So I want to run furniture and fixtures for the US. And then you can filter it by department, class, and location, and then you run generate, and it's gonna again run a background process. That's a common theme with fixed assets, and it'll run. That's a pretty quick process. We can see the revaluation finished. So while we wait for the report, the revaluation, you'll see now that it revalued the asset. It's now 1425, which updates, your net book value, obviously, and all that transaction, all that information is visualized here in the depreciation history. You'll be able to, excuse me, you'll be able to now see all the history for, acquisition, revaluation, write down, etc. So the valuation had an impact on the depreciation of 125, which is 5% of the 25. So we reversed what I had already depreciated because I did it the same month. and then it did the write down, right? So all that, and it did those two transactions in the same journal entry, and then obviously the journal entry for the depreciation. The report should have finished by now. So it finished. So once you run your reports, you come here to reports and come to my reports, and here's where the reports that you've run will show up. All the reports that you've run through the history of reporting that you run in, not as safe searches, but as actual reports. And you'll see here, there's a folder where all these reports are saved in the file cabinet. You can see here that I ran this report today, and then you can download it as XML or PDF, depending on what you want to do. So I'm just going to open it as a PDF. Might not be too pretty. But it'll show you the report, for what you ran in this process, right? So I run it for just one asset type. So you can see here, what my beginning balance was. In Excel, it looks better, obviously, but you can see what my beginning balance was for this office hours furniture that I bought. It was 0. I even had it at the beginning of my period, which is January 1st to 31st. You can see that I acquired it. You can see that I depreciated it. You can see that I revalued it and my depreciation and my write down. So you can see my current book value, right? So it shows you all that summarized history for the period that you chose. And there are all the reports as well. They're all documented in the in the fixed assets management module. So for now, just sort of the prepared of my end, the end of my prepared remarks. Sorry. So I'm just going to go through the questions that we had in the registration process and a couple of questions that we have today in the session. So the first question was, what products or app works with NetSuite to manage fixed assets? So this is a product, the fixed assets management module. Works with NetSuite natively. It's a NetSuite product developed by NetSuite and maintained by NetSuite. It's updated like everything in NetSuite a couple of times a year. Every time you have an upgrade, it does have a separate upgrade schedule as well for additional things because it is a bundle, but it's all integrated in your account. There is an upload file to create either assets midlife or new assets if you prefer to do it that way, right? If you prefer to do it via a manual upload creation and not through the proposal process, you can upload them. There are very clear steps that NetSuite provides in how to upload midlife assets. So the answer is yes. Basically everything can be uploaded into NetSuite. Everything can be updated into NetSuite as well. That also answers the question that we had today. So is there a template to be able to import large amounts of midlife assets? The answer is yes. Typically, the recommended file size, NetSuite says up to 5,000 lines. Obviously, it takes a while to create 5,000 lines because when you create an asset, it creates all the depreciation schedules for the future. So it knows your future projection for depreciation, but it's certainly doable. The next question that we have is, how will the NetSuite fixed asset management system help us prepare for an audit? The part of it is that you have all the information in the same system. You don't have an Excel spreadsheet with all the detail, and you can prove the depreciation value for each asset separately. If you need to do that, or you need to troubleshoot it, you can see what depreciation occurred for each individual asset. And if you're using the system properly, when you're depreciating, is updating the asset subledger, and is updating obviously the ledger when it's creating the depreciation transaction. So you can run reports where you can see at any given point what your GL ledger account value is and the sum on your register of all the assets for that specific type, if you're doing it by asset type. So that's where the asset type is handy, because you can have a lot of things predetermined, preset in the system. You don't have to change them every time, and it avoids errors. last question we have is, we would like to upload data maintained in spreadsheets into NetSuite. Will they add to existing information or overwrite it? So that's a very good question. So everything in NetSuite can be created. If you're uploading new assets, obviously it's going to create new records. If you want to update information, so let's say you want to update current costs, if you have that, if you made a mistake, or you want to update custodian or insurance information, anything that is not GL impacting, because we would recommend that you don't do that via CSV upload. Update anything, the best practice is to export the assets, and this number here, the internal ID, is the one that NetSuite recognize as being tied to the specific asset. And when you are importing fixed assets, there is or any record, but for that matter, you have the option of saying whether you want to add or update. And when you want to update, NetSuite requires you to map either this internal ID or something called the external ID, which is another very similar field that may be mapped to other system where you have assets for maintenance purposes, for example. So it's just an external key. So you have to map that, and because you're telling NetSuite to update it, it will know to update the file. But in the same file, you can have new assets and updated assets. So it's very flexible in that regard. So with that said, that is the end of my prepared remarks. If there are no additional questions, I'll stick around for a couple of minutes to see if there are any other questions, but I appreciate your attendance today. Thank you again for supporting us. This has been a very good 3 months of doing this process. Hopefully you're learning and this is very helpful to you. We do have support services that we offer. If you're interested, as little as 20 hours per year. That's something that we can discuss offline as well. If you're interested, please contact me, and we'll be happy to assist you in any optimization, implementation process, any reporting, anything along those lines. We are able to do that. Remember our YouTube page, where we have all the videos. Like I said, we've done 13 of these videos, and we have them all recorded and available to you in YouTube. So if you're interested in receiving that, please send me a note on the Q&A window, and we'll be sending this in the next couple of days. And next week, we'll be talking about expense reporting in NetSuite. So if you're interested, look at the email. So again, I'll hang around for a couple of more minutes, but thank you very much for your participation, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.